They found her at the tree line, not walking, not crawling, just there, face down in the frost, fingers dug into frozen earth like she'd been trying to pull herself back into the world and ran out of reasons to. Her scent hit all three of them at the same moment, and every single one of them stopped breathing. Because it wasn't just the blood, though there was enough of it to turn the snow dark for 10 feet in every direction. It wasn't the torn clothes, or the marks on her wrists, or the way her body had been left like something discarded. It was the fact that beneath all of it, beneath the violation and the cold and the silence, she still smelled like home, like the thing each of them had been quietly dying without, their mate. And someone had tried to make sure they never found her. The cold didn't bother Nadia Paul anymore. That was the first thing people got wrong about her. They saw the second-hand coat, the boots with the cracked left sole, the way she moved through the Portland morning market with her shoulders slightly forward. And they assumed she was someone the world had worn down. Someone waiting for permission to take up space. They were wrong. Nadia moved like that because she was watching. Always watching. The vendor who shortchanged the elderly woman in the blue scarf. The pack enforcer leaning against the corner post who tracked every unbonded omega that passed with the particular kind of attention that had nothing to do with security. The teenage girl pretending to browse dried herbs while she slipped a small bundle into her coat pocket because her family hadn't eaten a warm meal since the council's new tithe went into effect. Nadia bought 2 bundles of the same herb, walked past the girl, and left one on the edge of the cart without a word. She didn't do it to be kind. She did it because she remembered being that girl. 13 years old, sent undesignated, invisible in every way that mattered, and hungry in ways that food couldn't fix. That was 7 years ago. Now, she was 20. She had a small apartment above a Vietnamese restaurant on Burnside Street. She worked double shifts at the overnight print shop 3 blocks from the East Side Pack border, and she paid her council tithe on time every single month. Not because she respected the council. Because she understood consequences. She understood them the way only people who'd already paid the worst ones do. Quietly, completely, and without the luxury of forgetting. The market was thinning. The November sky over Portland pressed down gray and indifferent, the kind of cold that didn't announce itself dramatically. Just settled into your bones while you were distracted. Nadia pulled her coat tighter, tucked the paper bag of groceries under her arm, and turned toward home. She didn't see the black SUV idling at the curb until she was almost past it. She didn't recognize the council seal on the door panel until the window rolled down. And she didn't run, not because she wasn't afraid, but because she had learned a long time ago that running from the council only told them you had something worth chasing. Nadia Paul. The man in the passenger seat had the kind of voice that expected doors to open before he reached them. Mid-50s, silver at his temples. Eyes that had made a lot of decisions about other people's lives and slept fine afterward. "Councilman Hatch, we'll see you now." Nadia looked at him for exactly 3 seconds. "I have work at 6, she said. "You'll be done before 6. She was not done before 6. 30 miles north, at the edge of where Portland's grid dissolved into thick Douglas fir and frost-hardened ground, 3 men stood at the border of Harlow Pack territory and argued about the same thing they had been arguing about for 6 weeks. We expand the Eastern Patrol, or we don't. Garrett Cole's voice carried the particular flatness of someone who had already made the decision and was giving the others the courtesy of feeling heard. He was 31, built like load-bearing architecture, with dark eyes that tracked everything and revealed nothing. The pack called him the commander behind his back. To his face, they called him Alpha and meant it in every sense of the word. The border breaches aren't slowing down. We wait any longer. We're not protecting territory. We're just documenting its loss. You want to expand the patrol. You need more bodies. This from Marcus Webb, leaning against the hood of the truck with his arms crossed, jaw set the way it always was when he was 3 seconds from done with a conversation. He was broader than Garrett, darker-skinned, with the kind of physical stillness that people mistook for calm right up until the moment it wasn't. We're already running double shifts. You push the pack harder, you'll have exhaustion casualties before you have border casualties. So we recruit. From where? The last 3 Omega transfers the council approved were all redirected to Creighton's territory. Conveniently. Marcus's eyes moved to the third man, who had said nothing and was standing slightly apart from both of them, looking at the tree line. Levi. Garrett said it the way you say someone's name when you want them to come back from wherever they've gone. Levi's heart turned. He was the youngest of the three at 28, leaner than the other two, with light brown hair that needed cutting and gray eyes that people tended to find unsettling because they didn't harden when they were supposed to. He felt things at full volume and had never for once found a way to turn it down. The pack thought that made him the soft one. The pack was wrong. It made him the most dangerous because he paid attention to things the other two dismissed as noise. Something's wrong, Levi said. Marcus frowned. With the patrol? No. Levi's eyes stayed on the tree line. The wind had shifted, just slightly, just enough. With something else. Garrett was already moving before Levi finished the sentence, not because he'd caught it yet, but because in 11 years of running a pack together, he had learned that when Levi said something's wrong in that particular tone, the correct response was to move first and ask questions while moving. Marcus pushed off the hood. All three of them crossed the border tree line at the same moment. The scent reached them 10 steps in. It stopped all three of them cold. Blood, cold air. Frost turned earth, and beneath it, threaded through it like a live wire through wreckage, something that hit each of them in a completely different place and left the same wound. Home. Garrett's chest cracked open around a feeling he had no name for. Marcus made a sound low in his throat that he would never repeat and couldn't explain. Levi was already running. His boots hit frozen ground and he didn't slow, didn't calculate, didn't do the thing Garrett was always telling him to do. Assess before you act, think before you feel. He couldn't. Whatever that scent was, it had reached into his chest and grabbed something he hadn't known was still there, and now his body was moving on a frequency that bypassed every rational thought he owned. The trees thickened fast. Portland's northern edge bled into forest the way a wound bleeds into water, gradually, then completely. The light dropped, the cold sharpened, and the scent grew stronger with every step, which should have been a comfort and wasn't, because underneath the thread of home that kept pulling him forward, there was something else. Something that made his stomach drop. The smell of blood this far from the border didn't mean an animal. It never meant an animal. He heard Garrett and Marcus closing behind him. Garrett's footfall measured even at a run. Marcus's heavier, faster when his instincts overrode his discipline. None of them spoke. There was nothing to say yet. There was only the scent and the frost and the way the trees opened suddenly into a small clearing, where the ground was darker than it should have been. Levi stopped. For one full second he just stood there, because his mind needed that second to accept what his eyes were seeing, and even after it passed, acceptance felt like the wrong word for what settled into him. She was face down in the frost, small, still, one arm stretched forward like she'd been reaching for something. The tree line, the road, some version of tomorrow, and hadn't made it. Her coat was torn at the shoulder, the fabric dark and stiff with cold and blood. Her hair was spread across the frozen ground, dark against white, and her fingers were dug into the earth like she'd decided that if she was going to stop, she was going to stop fighting on her own terms. Levi dropped to his knees beside her before he'd made the conscious decision to move. Don't. Garrett's voice came from directly behind him, sharp and controlled. Don't touch her yet. We don't know. She's alive. Levi said it with a certainty that silenced Garrett completely because it wasn't a guess. He could hear her heartbeat, slow, unsteady, but there, a fragile, stubborn rhythm that had refused to quit even when everything around it had. She's alive and she's freezing. He heard Marcus exhale behind him, slow and deliberate. The kind of breath that meant he was holding something back that had no clean outlet. Levi's hands hovered over her without touching. He needed to see first, needed to understand the shape of what had been done before he moved her, because moving her wrong could finish what someone else had started. The marks on her wrists were visible even through the frost, not animal, not accidental, deliberate, methodical. The kind of marks left by restraints, by hands, by the specific, calculated cruelty of people who knew exactly what they were doing and did it anyway. His jaw locked. Levi, Marcus's voice was very quiet, her scent. I know. No, a pause. I mean, you know what I'm saying. Levi looked up at him. Marcus was standing very still, arms no longer crossed, hands open at his sides, which for Marcus Webb was the equivalent of falling apart. His dark eyes were fixed on the woman in the frost with an expression Levi had never seen on his face before, not in 11 years. Not in border wars or pack crises or the night they buried their former alpha and inherited a territory none of them had been ready for. Raw. That was the word for it. Marcus looked raw. Levi turned to Garrett. Garrett had gone completely still in the way that meant he was feeling something large and was refusing to let it move him. His dark eyes tracked over her, the coat, the wrists, the frozen ground, the blood, with the systematic precision of a man cataloging a situation. But his hands were pressed flat against his thighs, fingers slightly spread, and Levi recognized that because he'd only ever seen Garrett do it once before. The night his mother died. The night he'd had to be the alpha when every cell in his body wanted to be a son. He did it when he was trying to keep himself from shaking. "She's our mate," Levi said. Not a question. Not a revelation. Just the truth, spoken out loud so it existed in the air between all three of them and couldn't be taken back. Nobody contradicted him. The wind moved through the clearing, low and cold, lifting the edge of her hair, and the scent shifted. Just barely, just for a moment, and all three of them caught the full weight of it at once. Her, underneath everything that had been done to her, underneath the blood and the cold and the violation. Her actual scent, the one that existed before tonight, before whatever this was, warm and quiet and achingly specific, the way a scent is when it belongs to you, and has always belonged to you, and you just didn't have a name for the absence until you were standing 3 feet from the source. Marcus made a sound that wasn't a word and turned away for exactly 4 seconds. Then he turned back. "We need to move her," Garrett said. His voice was steady. Everything else about him wasn't. "Carefully. Levi, you take. I have her." Levi was already sliding his arms beneath her, one under her shoulders, one under her knees, lifting her with the kind of care usually reserved for things that have already broken once and cannot survive breaking again. She didn't wake, but her fingers, the ones that had been dug into the frozen earth, released their grip and curled slowly into the front of his jacket. Levi felt it happen and went completely still, not because it startled him, because it undid him, quietly, completely, the way a single thread pulled wrong can undo an entire seam. Her fingers were ice cold, even through the fabric, and they weren't gripping, not really, just resting there with the particular helplessness of a body that had spent everything it had, and was now operating purely on instinct, on need. He stood carefully, adjusting her weight against his chest, and something in the movement must have registered because she made a sound. Not a word, not even close to a word. Just a small, broken exhale that came from somewhere deep and unguarded, the kind of sound a person makes when they've been braced for impact for so long that the absence of it is its own kind of shock. Garrett was already moving, clearing a path back through the tree line, his phone out, voice low and controlled as he spoke to someone on the other end. Medical. Pack Medical. Not the council-affiliated clinic on the west side. Levi caught that immediately and felt something loosen in his chest. Whatever Garrett was feeling, whatever walls he was building around it in real time, he was still thinking clearly enough to keep her away from anything connected to the people who might have done this. Marcus walked parallel to Levi, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, his eyes moving constantly. Tree line, ground, shadows, tree line again. Not because he thought whoever had done this was still nearby. Because he needed somewhere to put the energy that had nowhere else to go. His hands had stopped shaking by the time they cleared the trees, but his jaw was set so tight. Levi could see the muscle jumping in his cheek. The truck was 20 feet away. "Back seat," Garrett said, pulling the door open. "Lay her flat." Levi ducked inside, settling her across the back seat with the same careful precision he'd used to lift her, and when he tried to pull his arm from beneath her shoulders, she made that sound again, that small, wrecked, involuntary sound, and her fingers tightened in his jacket. He stopped. He sat on the edge of the seat, half in and half out of the truck, and looked at her face for the first time properly. She was young, that was the first thing. Young in a way that made what had been done to her feel even more obscene, though he couldn't have explained why age made it worse when wrong was wrong at any age. Her face was bruised along one cheekbone, her lower lip split, dried blood at her temple where something had struck or where she'd hit the ground. But even beneath all of that, even through the damage, there was something in the structure of her face that was composed, defined. The face of someone who had learned to hold themselves still under pressure. She hadn't been broken before tonight. That mattered. Somehow, in a way he couldn't fully articulate, that mattered enormously. Levi. Garrett's voice from outside the truck. Quiet, careful in a way Garrett rarely was. We need to go. She won't let go. A silence. Then Marcus from the driver's side. Then stay with her. Garrett got in the passenger seat without another word. The truck moved. Levi stayed where he was, her fingers still closed in his jacket, his arms still beneath her shoulders. The cold coming off her in waves that were slowly, incrementally beginning to ease as the truck's heat filled the space around them. He didn't look at Garrett. He knew what he'd find. That controlled, lockdown expression. That meant Garrett was having a war with himself and winning through sheer force of will. He didn't look at Marcus either, though he could see the set of Marcus' shoulders in the front seat, rigid and deliberate. The posture of a man who was driving instead of feeling, because driving required his hands, and his hands needed something to do. None of them said it again. They didn't need to. It was already true whether they said it or not, and saying it again would require them to say the next part. The part that came after she's our mate. The part that's stirred with which means ended with a set of obligations and feelings and consequences that none of them had asked for, and none of them were remotely prepared to handle. Especially not like this. Especially not with her lying broken in the back seat of their truck, smelling like the home they'd each been quietly starving for, found in the worst possible way, at the worst possible moment. Garrett broke first, not visibly, just his voice, low and directed at the windshield rather than either of them. We don't know what happened yet. We know enough, Marcus said. We know what it looks like. Garrett. Marcus's voice dropped half a register. We know enough. Another silence. The road under the tires, the heater running. The soft, unsteady sound of her breathing in the back seat. Garrett turned his head slightly toward the window. She stays in the East Wing. Medical first. Then we find out who she is and what. Her name is Nadia. Both of them went still. Levi hadn't planned to say it. He didn't know where it came from, except that he'd looked at her face, and somehow the name had been there, the way some things are just true before you've been told them. He looked up and found Garrett watching him in the rearview mirror. Her jacket pocket, Levi said, quieter now. There's a print shop ID clipped to the inside, Nadia Paul. A beat. Marcus exhaled through his nose, slow, like the name had weight, and he was adjusting to carrying it. Garrett turned back the shield. Nadia, he said, just once. Like he was testing whether he was allowed to have it. The truck kept moving through the dark, and in the back seat, without waking, she turned her face slightly toward Levi's warmth. Like even unconscious, some part of her already knew. The Harlow Pack estate sat at the end of a private road that the county maps didn't acknowledge, surrounded by Douglas fir so dense that the house appeared suddenly, without warning, the way significant things often do. It was large without being ostentatious. 3 stories of dark timber and stone, every window lit from within, the kind of building that had been constructed with permanence in mind, with the specific intention of outlasting whatever came at it. Levi had never looked at it the way he looked at it now. Pulling up the drive, the gravel crunching under the tires, the porch light throwing a wide gold rectangle across the frost. He looked at it and thought, for the first time, about what it must look like from the outside. To someone who had never had permanence. To someone who had been left in the cold and the dark by the very people whose job was to protect her. The truck stopped. Marcus was out before the engine fully cut, pulling the back door open from the outside, and Levi looked up at him. Something moved between them. No words, no agreement spoken aloud, and then Marcus reached in and took her. Not roughly. With a carefulness that would have surprised anyone who didn't know him, his big hands impossibly gentle as he lifted her from the seat, adjusting her weight against his chest, and Levi felt the loss of her warmth immediately and said nothing about it. Garrett was already on the porch, the front door open, speaking in a low voice to the pack's physician, Dr. Renee Ashby, 50s, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, who had been with the Harlow Pack for 20 years and had the particular unflappable quality of someone who had seen enough that very little shocked her anymore. Until she saw Nadia, her expression didn't collapse. It tightened. Which was worse? East wing, she said, already moving. Second room. And I need all three of you out of the hallway once I'm in. She stays monitored, Garrett said. I am the monitor, Alpha. Renee didn't look back. Out of the hallway. Marcus carried her through the front door, and Levi followed close enough that he could still hear the unsteady thread of her breathing. And Garrett brought up the rear with his hand pressed flat against the doorframe for just a moment. Just one. Before he let go and followed them inside. The east wing was quieter than the rest of the house, warmer. The second room had a wide bed, neutral walls, a window that looked out onto the back tree line, and a lamp on the nightstand that Renee clicked on as Marcus laid Nadia down with the same impossible gentleness he'd used to lift her. She didn't stir. That stillness, the absolute unbroken quality of it, was the thing that frightened Levi most. Not the injuries, not the blood, not even the marks on her wrists. The stillness. Because Nadia Paul, whoever she was, had fingers that dug into frozen earth when she had nothing left. She was not. He understood instinctively, a woman who went quiet without a fight. Which meant whatever had been done to her had taken something it had no right to take. Out, Renee said, not unkindly, but with the absolute authority of someone who understood that the three large alphas standing in her patient's room were not helping, regardless of their intentions. Levi stepped back. Marcus didn't move immediately. He stood at the edge of the bed, looking down at Nadia with an expression that had stopped trying to be anything other than what it was, and then he pressed his thumb very lightly to the back of her hand. One brief, barely their point of contact, and stepped back. Garrett was already in the hallway. Renee closed the door. The three of them stood in the corridor outside the east wing in complete silence, and for a long moment none of them moved. The house hummed around them. The heat system, the distant sound of pack members in the main hall who didn't yet know what had been brought home, the ordinary texture of a night that had become completely unrecognizable. Marcus leaned his back against the wall and tipped his head up toward the ceiling. Levi sat on the floor directly outside the door, his back against the wall, knees up, and didn't pretend he was going anywhere. Garrett stood in the center of the corridor with his arms crossed, and Levi watched the muscles in his jaw work through something that didn't have a clean resolution. The council seal, Garrett said finally, quietly, on her jacket pocket, partially torn off, but it was there. The corridor got very still. You saw it, Marcus said. Not a question. I saw it. Levi's hands, as resting on his knees, went very still. The council seal, on her jacket, which meant she hadn't just been found near council territory, she had been brought there. Summoned or taken or lured, and then left in the frost at the border of their land like something disposed of, like a message, or a warning. We don't move on that yet, Garrett said, and his voice had shifted into the register he used when he was leashing himself hard. We don't move on anything until she's stable, and she's told us what she wants us to know. Nothing gets decided without her. Marcus lowered his head from the ceiling, looked at Garrett. Agreed. Levi said nothing because he was listening to her breathing through the door. Still unsteady, still fragile, but continuous. Still there, still there. The door didn't open for a long time, and all three of them stayed exactly where they were, in the corridor, outside her room, without discussing it or deciding it. Because some things don't require a decision. Some things are just what you do when the person behind the door is yours, and the world outside has already shown you exactly what it does when you leave her unguarded. Levi pressed his shoulder blades harder into the wall. The house settled around them, and the lamp in the east wing room stayed on. It was Garrett who heard the door handle turn first. He was on his feet before Renee had fully opened it, and the look on her face when she stepped into the corridor stopped all three of them from speaking. Not because it was unreadable, because it was the opposite. Completely, devastatingly readable in the way that medical professionals only allow themselves to be when the facts are too large to cushion. She pulled the door nearly closed behind her. Then she looked at Garrett because he was the alpha, because that was protocol, because that was how these conversations were supposed to go. But her eyes moved to all three of them when she spoke. She's stable, Renee said. Her core temperature is coming up. The hypothermia was significant but not critical. She was found in time, a pause that had weight in it. Barely. Levi's eyes closed for exactly 1 second. The injuries. Garrett's voice was controlled in the way a pressure valve is controlled. Tell me. Renee folded her hands in front of her, a gesture Levi recognized as the one she used when she was deciding how much truth a room could hold. Then she seemed to decide that these 3 men in this corridor outside this particular door deserved all of it. Multiple contusions, 2 cracked ribs, she'll feel those for weeks. The lacerations are superficial, they won't scar badly. The restraint marks on her wrists are consistent with prolonged binding. She was held, not just grabbed. Renee's voice stayed level with visible effort, and she was assaulted. Sexually. More than once, and not gently, and not by one person. The corridor absorbed that. Marcus turned and put his fist through the wall, not explosively. Not with the uncontrolled violence of someone losing themselves. With the slow, deliberate force of someone who had chosen the wall specifically, because the wall was the only thing in the corridor that deserved it. The plaster cracked. His knuckles bled. He pulled his hand back, looked at it, and said nothing. Garrett hadn't moved. His face had done something complicated and then locked down into a stillness that was more frightening than rage. Levi was still on the floor. He didn't trust his legs right now. He pressed the back of his head against the wall and stared at the ceiling and breathed through the thing that was expanding in his chest, like something trying to break out of a space too small for it. "Is she conscious?" he asked. "In and out. She's been trying to speak." Renee hesitated. "She keeps saying the same thing." "What?" Another hesitation. Shorter. "She keeps saying she paid her tithe. She paid it on time." Renee's voice for the first time fractured slightly at the edges, like she thinks that's why this happened. Like she's trying to figure out what rule she broke. The silence that followed, that was a different kind of silence than the ones before it. It had a shape, a specific, horrible shape. Levi understood it immediately. Understood it in his body before his mind caught up, because he had spent 28 years feeling things before he could name them. She hadn't been broken by what they'd done to her body. She was being broken by the story she was telling herself about why it had happened. By the deeply human, deeply devastating instinct to make yourself the cause of your own destruction, because causation implies control, and control implies it can be prevented next time. There was no next time she could have prevented. There was no rule she had broken. "She needs to know that," Levi said. "She needs to be stable first," Renee said. "She needs to know that before she wakes up fully and builds a wall around it." He looked at Renee directly, because once she does, she won't let anyone close enough to say it. Renee studied him for a moment, then she stepped aside from the door. 2 minutes, she said. "Don't touch her without permission, don't crowd her, and if she asks you to leave, you leave." Levi was on his feet. He looked at Garrett. Garrett gave a single nod, not permission, exactly. More like acknowledgement. Like he understood that this particular thing needed to be Levi, because Levi was the one who had held her in the truck, and her body already knew his warmth, and that mattered in ways that pack hierarchy didn't have a category for yet. Marcus leaned against the wall and looked at his bleeding knuckles and said nothing. Levi pushed the door open gently and stepped inside. The lamp was warm and low. She was under 2 blankets, her dark hair spread across the pillow, her face turned slightly toward the door. The bruise along her cheekbone had deepened in the heat of the room, and the split in her lip had been cleaned and treated. And she looked, even like this, even damaged and small against the wide bed, like someone who had a spine made of something harder than bone. Her eyes were open, not fully. Half-masked, glassy with exhaustion pain and whatever Renee had given her for it, but open and tracking. And when they found Levi in the doorway, they didn't go wide with fear the way he'd half expected. They narrowed slightly, assessing. He stayed in the doorway, didn't move closer, gave her the distance and let her decide what to do with it. "You found me," she said. Her voice was wrecked, hoarse and low and stripped of everything except the bare fact of the words. "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment. The lamp hummed. Somewhere outside, wind moved through the firs. "I didn't ask to be brought here," she said. "I know. I don't." She stopped, swallowed. Her fingers moved against the blanket edge, the same restless, gripping motion from the frozen ground. "I don't need saving." Levi looked at her, really looked the way he looked at things he wanted to understand completely, and said the only true thing he had. "I know that too." Her eyes stayed on his face. Searching for the lie in it, she didn't find one. And something in her expression, not softening, not yielding, but shifting, changed in a way that was too small to name and too significant to miss. Levi didn't move. He understood, with the particular instinct of someone who had spent a lifetime paying attention to things others dismissed, that the worst thing he could do right now was close the distance she hadn't offered him. She had given him exactly one thing, the absence of fear. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, enormous, but it was not an invitation, and he would not treat it as one. So he stayed in the doorway, and she stayed in the bed, and the lamp held them both in its quiet gold circle and asked nothing of either of them. "Who are you?" she said, still that wrecked voice. Still assessing. Still, underneath all of it, sharply, stubbornly present in a way that made his chest ache with something adjacent to relief. "Levi Hart." He paused. "This is Harlow Pack territory. You're in the east wing of the main house." Something moved across her face at the word territory. A quick, involuntary tightening that she controlled almost instantly, but not quite fast enough. "I'm not Pack," she said. "I know, I don't have a pack." The words came out flat, practiced. The tone of someone who had said a thing so many times it had stopped hurting. Or had learned to say it that way so no one would know it still did. "Unaffiliated Omega, I pay the independent tithe. I have documentation. You don't need documentation here." Her eyes moved to the door behind him. Checking, he realized, whether it was fully open, whether she had a clear line to it, whether the exit existed. He stepped sideways, fully into the room, away from the doorway, leaving it completely unobstructed. She saw him do it, saw the deliberateness of it. Her eyes came back to his face. "There are 3 of you," she said. He didn't ask how she knew. Her nose worked fine. Even through the medication, even through her own injuries, she had caught the scent overlap in the corridor. 3 distinct signatures on the air outside her door. Of course she had. "Yes," he said simply. "And you all." She stopped. Her jaw tightened. She was working through something that was clearly costing her, and he watched her do it without rushing her. "You think I'm your mate. We know you are." The flatness that crossed her face then was not disbelief. It was something more complicated and more painful than disbelief. It was the expression of someone receiving information that should have been beautiful and could not be. Yet, because of everything that had just happened, because of what had been done to her before they found her, because the word mate now lived in the same night as the worst thing that had ever happened to her, and those 2 facts were tangled together in a way that was going to take a long time to separate. He watched her feel all of that, and he didn't look away from it. "That's not." Her voice broke slightly. She pulled it back. "That's not something I can think about right now. You don't have to. Don't tell me what I don't have to do." Sharp, immediate. The first real heat in her voice, and it didn't frighten him. It steadied him, because it meant she was still in there. Still herself, still capable of pushing back. "You're right," he said. "I'm sorry." That silenced her for a moment, like the apology was unexpected. Like she had braced for the pushback, and the absence of it left her briefly without footing. Her fingers were doing it again, working the edge of the blanket, that restless, gripping motion. He watched her hands and understood that she was someone who processed through her body when her mind got too full. Someone who needed to hold something when everything felt like it was coming loose. He crossed to the chair beside the bed, slowly, announcing every step with his body before his feet made it, and sat down. Not close enough to crowd, close enough to be real. "You don't have to talk," he said. "You don't have to do anything. I'm just going to sit here for a while, if that's all right." She looked at him for a long time. "Why?" she said. "Because you've been alone in the cold for long enough." The silence that followed that was the longest one yet. The lamp hummed. Her breathing, he was tracking it constantly, couldn't stop, evened out incrementally, not relaxing, just recalibrating. The way a body does when it decides, on some level below conscious thought, that the immediate threat has stepped back far enough to allow one single, careful breath. Her eyes drifted toward the window, the dark tree line beyond the glass, the frost on the lower pane, the faint reflection of the lamp in the dark. "They told me," she said quietly, "that the summons was routine. Tithe documentation review." Her voice had gone somewhere flat and distant, not because she was detaching, but because she was choosing her words with the careful precision of someone who had already decided how much of this she was going to say and was rationing it. There were 4 of them in the room. A pause. Councilman Hatch, 3 of his enforcement officers. Levi's hands, resting on his knees, went still. "I fought," she said, and the way she said it, quiet, direct, without any request for acknowledgement, was the most devastating thing he had heard in a very long time. Not because it was dramatic, because it wasn't, because she said it the way you state a fact you need on the record, because it mattered to her that he knew she had fought. "I know you did," he said. Her eyes came back from the window, found his, and for the first time since he'd stepped into the room, the assessment in them shifted into something rawer and less defended. Not trust, not yet. Something that came before trust, the fragile, terrifying moment where a person decides whether the risk of being seen is worth the cost of being known. She didn't look away, neither did he. And in the quiet space between them, with the lamp burning low and the frost on the glass and the corridor outside, holding two men who were waiting without being asked to, something passed between Nadia Paul and Levi Hart that had no name yet. But it was real, and it was the first thing that had been purely, uncomplicatedly real in a night full of wreckage. Her eyes grew heavy, the medication pulling her under. And just before she went, her hand uncurled from the blanket edge and rested, open, on the space between them. Not reaching, just open. Levi looked at it for a long moment. Then he placed his hand beside hers on the blanket. Not touching, just close enough that the warmth reached her. Close enough that she knew she wasn't alone. She slept. Not peacefully, Levi could tell that immediately. Her breathing stayed slightly uneven, her fingers curling and releasing against the blanket in small rhythmic contractions, her brow pulling together every few minutes around something she couldn't escape, even unconscious. But she stayed under, and her body, which had been running on nothing but frozen survival instinct, for God knows how long, took the rest it was owed with the grim efficiency of something that had been waiting for permission. Levi stayed in the chair. He didn't examine that decision. It wasn't a decision, exactly. It was just the only thing that made sense. The corridor outside had gone quiet in the particular way that meant Garrett and Marcus were still there. He could feel them, the way pack members always could, the low peripheral hum of their presence just beyond the door. Waiting. He didn't go out to them. They didn't come in. Some unspoken agreement held the room separate from everything outside it, a small protected silence that none of them were willing to break yet. It was Nadia who broke it, not intentionally, not consciously. She made a sound in her sleep, sharp, involuntary, the sound of someone who has walked into a memory they can't outrun, and her whole body contracted, shoulders pulling in, knees drawing up, the ancient physical security of someone trying to make themselves smaller than the thing coming for them. Levi was leaning forward before he'd decided to move. Nadia low, even, not a command, not a whisper. Just her name, placed carefully in the air beside her like something she could choose to reach for. She didn't wake, but she heard it. Some sort of layer of her heard it, because the contraction eased. Slightly, not completely, but enough. He exhaled, and that was when the door opened. Not Renee, Garrett. He came in quietly, which for Garrett meant without the weight of authority he carried everywhere else. Just a man stepping into a room, his eyes going immediately to Nadia, tracking her the way Levi had been tracking her, with the involuntary, total attention of someone who cannot not look. Then his eyes moved to Levi, then to Levi's hand on the blanket beside hers. Something crossed Garrett's face that was gone before Levi could fully read it. He moved to the far side of the room, put his back to the wall, and crossed his arms. Not aggressively, just the posture he defaulted to when he needed to contain himself. They stayed like that for a moment, the two of them, the sleeping woman between them. "Marcus is outside," Garrett said, very quietly. "I know." He wrapped his hand. "He's fine. I know that too." Garrett's jaw moved. Renee pulled the medical file, cross-referencing the injuries with what's on record for council enforcement's procedures. A pause that had something corrosive in it. It's not the first time they've done this. Levi's eyes stayed on Nadia's face. To her? To omegas like her, unaffiliated, no pack protection. Independent tithe payers. Garrett's voice had dropped into that low, pressurized register. There are 3 other cases in the last 18 months, none of them reported. One of them, he stopped. One of them what? One of them didn't make it. The room held that. Levi felt it land in him the way heavy things land. Not with a crash, but with a slow, sinking weight that displaced everything else and settled at the bottom and stayed there. "They've been using the tithe summons as axe," Garrett continued. bringing in unbonded Omegas with no one to report to, no one to come looking, no Pack Alpha to file a challenge. And Hatch, the name came out like something he was trying not to spit. Hatch has been running it. With council immunity and enforcement protection, and 18 months of no consequences. Until now, Levi said, until now. Garrett's eyes moved back to Nadia, because this time they left her at our border. The word left sat wrong. Levi turned it over, examined it. That wasn't an accident, he said slowly. Garrett looked at him. They knew whose territory that was, Levi said. They knew the border markers. They didn't leave her there because they were careless. Something cold was moving through his chest, methodical and clarifying. They left her there because they wanted us to find her. They wanted a response. They wanted justification, Garrett said quietly, for whatever comes next. The implication of that opened up beneath them like a drop. If the 3 alphas of Harlow Pack responded to what had been done to an unaffiliated Omega by moving against the council, without proof locked down, without pack law procedure followed to the letter, Hatch could frame it as aggression, as territorial overreach, as 3 rogue alphas using an Omega's assault as a pretext for a power grab they'd been planning anyway. They had been set up, and Nadia had been the instrument of it. The door pushed open further, and Marcus came in, his right hand wrapped in clean cloth, his expression stripped of every layer except the one underneath all the others. He looked at Nadia, then at Garrett. "Tell me you have a plan," Marcus said. "I have the beginning of one. That's not the same thing." "No," Garrett agreed. "It's not." Marcus moved to the window, stood with his back to them, looking out at the frost and the dark tree line. And Levi watched the line of his shoulders and understood that Marcus was doing the thing he always did when he was trying not to act before he was ready, putting something physical between himself and the impulse. The glass, the distance, the dark. "She doesn't know," Levi said. Both of them looked at him. "She doesn't know they used her deliberately. She thinks she's trying to figure out what rules she broke." His voice was very quiet. "When she wakes up fully, she's going to find out that she wasn't just attacked. She was chosen, specifically, because she had no one." He paused. "That's going to hit her differently than the rest of it." The room absorbed that truth in silence. And Nadia slept on, unknowing, her fingers still curled against the blanket, while outside the window, the frost kept forming. And somewhere across the city, in a council building with sealed records and clean floors and immunity plaques on the wall, a man who had made a calculated decision about the value of her life was sleeping just fine. Marcus turned from the window. His eyes were very dark. "Then we make sure," he said quietly, "that when she finds out, she doesn't find out alone." The words settled into the room like something load-bearing. Nobody argued with them. Nobody qualified them or attached conditions or ran the tactical implications. They just sat there in the lamp-warm air and became true the way things become true when 3 people who don't say things they don't mean all let them stand unchallenged. Levi looked at his hand on the blanket beside hers. He thought about the print shop ID in her jacket pocket, Nadia Paul, a name clipped to the inside of a second-hand coat, which meant she carried her identity close and kept it hidden. Not because she was ashamed of it, but because she had learned at some point that visible things get taken. He thought about the way she'd said, "I don't have a pack with that practiced flatness." The way she'd said, "I fought without asking him to be moved by it." He thought about what it cost a person to survive something unsurvivable and wake up in a stranger's house and still be sharp enough to check the door. She was going to wake up soon, fully. Not the half-conscious, medication-soft version of waking that had allowed her to talk to him without all her defenses in place. Fully awake, fully herself, with everything Renee had given her metabolized, and the complete reality of her situation assembled in front of her, like a wreckage she'd have to decide what to do with. And she was going to have questions. Real ones, hard ones. The kind that required honest answers, even when honest answers were complicated. Even when the truth came with implications she hadn't asked for and might not want. Levi pulled his hand back from the blanket slowly, stood up, looked at Garrett. "She needs to hear it from someone who isn't going to manage her," he said. "No alpha tone, no pack authority. Just the facts, laid out plainly, and then space for her to decide what she does with them." Garrett met his eyes. "You think I'd manage her. I think you manage everything. I think it's how you're built, and I don't say that as a criticism." Levi kept his voice even. I'm saying she'll feel it. And she'll close. Something moved through Garrett's expression. Resistance first, then the particular honesty of a man who knows when he's being accurately described. His jaw shifted. Then you tell her, Garrett said. We all tell her. Levi looked at Marcus, together, because she needs to see that we're not going to divide this up and handle her in pieces. She needs to see that we're going to be the same in the same room at the same time. Marcus turned fully from the window. His wrapped hand hung at his side and his dark eyes moved between Levi and Garrett with the slow, weighing attention he gave to things he was deciding whether to trust. Then he nodded. Once. Definitive. Garrett uncrossed his arms. It was a small thing, a physical thing. But Levi had known Garrett Cole for 11 years, and he understood that uncrossing his arms in a room where he felt exposed was the equivalent of anyone else taking a full step forward. When she wakes, Garrett said. When she wakes, Levi confirmed. The three of them settled into the room then, not hovering, not crowding, each finding a place that gave her space and still kept them present. Marcus returned to the window but turned so his back wasn't fully to the room. Garrett moved to the far wall and sat on the floor with his back against it, forearms on his knees, head tipped back. Levi returned to the chair, the lamp burned, the frost built on the glass, and Nadia's breathing slowly, incrementally changed. The shift was subtle, a slight deepening, a change in the rhythm, the particular quality of breath that moves from sleep unconscious to almost waking. Levi caught it first and sat forward without meaning to. Then Marcus turned fully from the window. Then Garrett lifted his head from the wall, all three of them watching her come back. Her fingers moved first, that same gripping motion, but slower now, more deliberate, like her body was taking inventory before her mind committed to consciousness. Then her brow pulled together. Then her breathing changed again, caught slightly, the way it does when awareness arrives and brings the weight of everything with it. Her eyes opened, fully this time. Dark and clear and immediate, moving across this first, then the lamp, then the window then, one by one, each of them. Levi in the chair, Marcus by the window, Garrett against the far wall. She didn't startle, she assessed. Levi watched her do it, watched her take in the room, the three of them, her own body under the blankets, the medical wrap on her wrists, the lamp, the exits, all of it catalogued in roughly 4 seconds, with the systematic efficiency of someone who had trained themselves to understand their situation before they reacted to it. Then she sat up, slowly, with visible pain, her breath caught hard on the ribs and her jaw locked around it, but she sat up, pushed herself upright against the headboard and pulled the blanket to her waist, and looked at all three of them from a position that was as close to even ground as she could construct from a hospital bed. Tell me, she said. Her voice was clearer now, still rough at the edges, still carrying the night in it, but the fog was gone. The medication was gone. This was Nadia Paul at full attention, hurting and upright, and refusing to receive whatever was coming lying down. Levi looked at Garrett. Garrett looked at her, and then he did something Levi had seen him do maybe twice in 11 years. He told her the truth, without softening a single edge of it. You were targeted, Garrett said, specifically. Deliberately. Because you were unaffiliated and unprotected and the council knew no one would come looking. His voice was even. Not cold. Even, the way a level surface is even, because it has to be to hold weight. The summons was not routine, it was access, and Hatch has done it before. The room went very still. Nadia's eyes didn't widen. They did something worse. They went very quiet, in the way eyes go quiet when a person is absorbing something that is rearranging the architecture of everything they thought they understood. How many times, she said. At least 3 others that we know of. How many survived? A beat. 2, Garrett said. The number landed. She didn't look away from him. She didn't cry. She didn't collapse into the information the way people sometimes did when the truth was too large. She sat with it, upright against the headboard, and let it be as large as it was. And then she said very quietly the thing that broke all 3 of them in different places. I paid every tithes on time. Not as an argument, not as a protest, as a grief. The grief of someone who had done everything right inside a system that had never intended to protect her, and was only now fully understanding that. Levi's throat closed. Marcus turned back to the window and pressed his forehead against the cold glass. Garrett held her gaze without flinching, because she deserved someone who wouldn't look away from what she was feeling, and said, with a quiet and absolute certainty that had nothing of the alpha in it and everything of the man. It was never about the tithe. Her chin lifted slightly. One single, controlled breath. "I know," she said, and in her eyes, beneath the grief and the clarity and the exhaustion, something shifted. Not softness, not surrender. Something harder and more permanent than either. The decision to still be standing. Nadia felt it settle into her bones like something that had always been there, waiting for the right moment to declare itself. Not a new feeling, not something these three men had given her. Something she had carried through 7 years of early morning shifts and second-hand coats and tithes paid on time and doors closed quietly so no one would hear her cry. She had always been standing. She had just never had anyone in the room when she realized it. She looked at them. Really looked, the way she hadn't allowed herself to yet, because looking required stillness, and stillness had felt dangerous since the moment Councilman Hatch's black SUV had rolled up to the curb, and everything she thought she understood about consequences had been proven catastrophically wrong. Levi first. In the chair beside her, gray eyes open and steady, not performing calm, but actually possessing it in the particulars of someone who had made peace with feeling everything and surviving it anyway. He had sat beside her through the dark without asking her to be grateful for it. That mattered. Marcus at the window, his forehead no longer against the glass, turned back to the room now, his wrapped hand at his side, and his dark eyes on her with an expression that was so unguarded, it almost hurt to look at directly. Like staring at something bright, he had put his fist through a wall for her without ever having spoken a single word to her. She didn't know what to do with that yet, but she felt it. Somewhere beneath the ribs, beneath the cracked ones, that screamed when she breathed too deep, she felt it. And Garrett, still against the far wall, still on the floor, forearms on his knees. He had told her the truth without dressing it, without softening the edges or managing her reaction, or deciding in advance what she could handle. He had looked at her like she was someone capable of bearing real things, and then handed her the realest thing in the room. She had not been broken by what they did to her. She understood that now in a way she hadn't an hour ago. She had been hurt, profoundly, in ways that were going to live in her body and her sleep and her unguarded moments for a long time. She was not going to pretend otherwise, and she was not going to perform recovery for anyone in this room or any other, but broken was a different thing entirely. Broken was what Hatch had intended, and he had failed. She shifted against the headboard, and her ribs punished her for it, and she breathed through it steadily, not hiding the pain but not letting it speak for her either. Her hands moved to her lap, and she looked down at them for a moment, the wrap on her wrists, the cleaned cuts on her knuckles from where she had fought back. She had fought back. She looked up. "I need 3 things," she said. Her voice had found its footing now, rough at the edges but level underneath. "And I need them before anything else gets decided or discussed or planned." All 3 of them were fully attentive. No shifting, no exchanging glances. Just present, in the complete way that people are present when they understand that what is about to be said matters. "First," she said, "I need to know that nobody in this house is going to make decisions about my life without asking me. Not for my protection, not because of what I am to you, not for any reason." She held Garrett's gaze specifically because he was the alpha and he needed to hear it from her directly. "I am not a rescued thing, I am a person, and I will be treated like one." Garrett held her gaze without a flicker. "Yes," he said. "Just that." She nodded once. "Second, whatever you're planning to do about Hatch and the council, I am part of that conversation. I am not a witness you protect in a back room. I am the person it happened to, and my voice is the first one in that room, not the last." Marcus made a that was almost a laugh, low and warm and surprised out of him, and when she looked at him, he was shaking his head slowly with something on his face that looked like the beginning of a smile he hadn't planned on. "Absolutely," he said. She felt something loosen in her chest, just slightly, just enough. "Third." She paused here, because the third one was the one that had been sitting at the back of her throat. Since Levi had said, "We know you are," and she had told herself she couldn't think about it yet. She could think about it now. She was thinking about it now, clearly and completely, and it terrified her in the specific way that only true things do. This mate thing. Whatever that means for the 3 of you, whatever it means in pack terms, whatever it means biologically or by law, She looked at each of them in turn. Levi, Marcus, Garrett. It means nothing to me until it means something to me. You don't get my trust because fate decided something. You get it the same way anyone gets it. A pause. You earn it. The room was very quiet. Then Levi leaned forward in the chair, elbows on his knees, and looked at her with those steady gray eyes, and said, with the complete simplicities of someone who had already decided something long before she'd asked, "We know." And Marcus crossed the room slowly and sat on the edge of the windowsill closer to the bed, and his voice when he spoke was quiet and rough and genuine, in the way of someone who did not make promises lightly. "We're not going anywhere." And Garrett rose from the floor and came to stand at the foot of the bed, and he looked at her the way she imagined. He looked at things he intended to protect with everything he had, and he said nothing at all for a moment because Garrett Cole understood that some things were bigger than words and smaller than silence. Then he said, "You came to us already standing, Nadia. We're just asking if we can stand beside you." She felt it then. Not a flood, not a collapse, nothing dramatic or cinematic or overwhelming. Just a quiet cellular warmth that started somewhere behind her sternum and spread outward slowly, the way heat spreads through cold hands held near a fire. Patient, incremental, real. Her eyes stung. She did not look away. "I don't know how to do this," she said honestly. "Any of it. I've never had a pack. I've never had people who..." She stopped, swallowed. "I've never had people." Levi reached out slowly the way he had learned to move in this room, announcing every motion before he made it, and placed his hand over hers on the blanket. Not gripping, not claiming, just there, warm against her cold fingers. She looked down at it. Then Marcus's hand came to rest on the blanket near her other side, open-palmed, offered without demand. And Garrett reached forward and very gently, very carefully, touched 2 fingers to the back of her hand where the wrap ended and her skin began. 3 points of warmth. 3 separate, distinct, unhurried presences, not surrounding her, not closing in, just near. She breathed in. The room smelled like Douglas fir and frost, and the particular warm overlap of 3 scents that her body recognized before her mind had caught up with them. And underneath all of it, underneath everything, she could smell something she had no name for yet. Safety, actual, earned, present tense safety. Her eyes closed, not in pain this time, not in fear or exhaustion or the darkness of a frozen clearing. Just in the quiet, provisional, terrifying, and tender act of allowing herself to feel something good while knowing it was real. Outside the window, the frost on the glass had begun very slowly to melt at the edges where the room's warmth reached it, and the first pale suggestion of light was pressing itself against the far edge of the dark sky, and the Douglas firs stood steady in the cold the way they always had and always would, patient and enormous and completely unmoved by winter. Nadia Paul was not healed. She was not fixed or rescued or saved in the clean, simple way of stories that don't respect the people inside them. She was here, breathing, held without being held, chosen without being taken. And for the first time in longer than she could honestly remember, the future did not feel like something to survive. It felt like something she might in time actually want. Her fingers turned slowly beneath Levi's hand and held on. "That's a wrap on this one. I'm already dreaming up the next story, but I want to hear from you. Is there a trope, a character, or a mood you've been craving? Tell me in the comments. You might just shape what comes next. With love, Sayer.